This is probably the segment of the show that most people are looking forward to hearing about today. Regal's first match back on television is a Nitro match against a new competitor known as Bill Goldberg. Steve wrote, on my first night back at work after 7 weeks out, I got to the arena to be told I was wrestling Bill Goldberg. It was early in his massive win streak, but it was obvious he was on his way to becoming a major superstar. Up until then, he'd beaten everyone on the WCW roster in a minute or less. His longest match must have been no more than a minute and a half. Everyone has their own version of what happened next, but this is mine. I remember it all clearly because for once I went to work without taking any drugs beforehand. I weighed about 280 pounds by now. I looked like a badly made bed. Before we keep going, I'm going to use that a lot in my future references. Looked like a badly made bed. What a great line.
I mean, it's such a classy way of saying you look like shit, dude.
Yes, I love it so much. Here's what he wrote. Anyway, these are my orders for the match: to go out and have a competitive 6-minute match with him. He was to win in the end. We laid out this match in front of people in charge. He got in the ring, did 1 or 2 moves on him, and he did nothing back. I did 1 or 2 more with the same comeback from Goldberg. Nothing. That's how it went on. I had to keep attacking him to keep the match going. I was opening myself up for him to retaliate, and he just wasn't taking the openings. I was even telling him to do this or that, and he just wasn't doing it. I don't know what his excuses were for the match. All I know is that he's blamed me publicly for it. When we eventually got through the match and got to the back, straight away, Bill apologized to me. Something else he seemed to forget about it later when he retold the story. I'm sorry, he said. I just didn't know what to do out there. We had a chat, shook hands, and everything was fine. Then Eric came in and started chewing Bill out, which was my cue to leave. Then I was called into the office in front of Eric and the people who laid out the match. Eric was screaming, going absolutely berserk. I told him, Eric, I can't hit myself. It's not my fault. How can you expect someone who has never wrestled for more than a minute and a half to go out and do 6 minutes? He won't know what to do. That was the truth of it. It wasn't Bill's fault. Let's talk about this. I have to be honest. I've heard this story a million different times from a different variety of different people in the industry. And I kind of forgot this detail that's in his book that you were going off afterwards. What do you remember of this moment in time?
This this is going to be fun. But it's also going to be a challenge because we're going to leave a name out.
And why? Why are we doing it?
Out of respect.
Okay.
We can go back to it later if you feel the need to. I was hot. Bill Goldberg, every time he walked through the curtain, compounded his own interest.
Right.
Amongst the fans. He was on a roll. We wanted that role to continue. We wanted him to look good. Granted, we wanted him to be able to have more and more of a match because we knew at some point in time, this minute and 30-second stuff isn't going to work. We're going to run out of people for him to eat. Bill is going to have to learn how to have a more competitive match. Can't just go out and eat people. There'll be no one left to eat at a certain point. So there was an intention on all of our parts, mine in particular at this point in time, to nurture Bill along, maximize what he was able to do, but start to grow his repertoire and his ability to have long matches longer than a minute and a half. Right? So that was the setting going into this match. Now, there was an agent involved whose job it was to make sure both talents understood the match or what we needed out of the match, help lay it out with them before the match so that the talent had a couple hours to talk through what they were going to do before the match, particularly if you were dealing with somebody who is incredibly new to the industry and needed sufficient help and support from a good agent, as well as the person he was about to wrestle in Steve Regal, to make sure that everybody was on the same page when they got out there. Clearly, that never happened. Whose fault is that? Absolutely the agents. To a degree, Mr. Regal's, because he would have known. So there's a little bit of responsibility to go around, and mine, by the way. I have to take some because it was important to me. Bill had, I was just about to say it so much the wrong way. Bill got a lot of attention from a lot of people, including me, who was really interested in seeing him evolve as quickly as he could, but not too quickly because we didn't want to overexpose him. We didn't want to expose what he was not capable of doing.
Right.
I didn't go to the agent and say, hey, just want to check in. Both these guys know what they're doing. Let's walk through the match. Kind of like one of the things I used to see when I first got to WWE as a talent was the amount of time that Vince McMahon would spend watching the talent go through their match, walking through it, not a full-blown match, walking through the match and talking through the beats in the match that were really critical in order to tell the story. Vince McMahon would go out to the ring starting at about 1 o'clock, and Kevin Dunn would be on the truck, and everybody could hear the dialogue between the two. Vince would have his headsets on, speaking into the mic, and Kevin Dunn in the truck knew what the match was going to be. The talent were all on the same page, and Vince's expectations were communicated to the talent. It was really impressive. That never happened in WCW. In WCW, what happened at this time is we'd create the format, creative gets together, we'd lay everything out, we'd lay out the interviews, okay, give it to the producers, the agents. They would take, okay, I'll take these 3 matches, you take those 3 matches, whatever. They would go off and they would have these independent conversations amongst themselves. And that was it until we saw the match. We didn't have that step that still exists in WWE today, where every single one of the matches, the talent goes out and walks through that match. So everybody in the truck knows what's going to happen during the match, the big beats. At that time, Vince knew what was going on. Now it's Paul, I'm sure, Paul Levesque. But we didn't do that in WCW. So that's my part of the responsibility that goes around here in retrospect. But all I know is the match was the shits. We did exactly what we didn't want to do, which is expose Bill Goldberg for what he's not capable of doing. And the part that gets left out of this, and Steve touched on it a little bit, and this is, I'm going to go right back. This is called the callback in a television business, or maybe even a feature film business, or in stand-up comedy routines. The formula, callback formula, is very popular in stand-up comedy as well. There's formulas everywhere, folks. There's formats, there's formulas. It's just the way of the world. But going back to what, Conrad, you said earlier, and we talked about earlier, is Steve came from that era. He was taught, whether it's here's this character, Lord Steven Regal, you're going to be a heel. His reaction to that was not, yeah, but I don't really want to do that. Oh, it doesn't work for me. What's in it for me? Oh, I don't feel like a heel. It was, yes, sir, I'll go figure out how to do it as well as I possibly can. In this particular situation, that same work ethic manifested in the fact that the agent, who will remain unnamed because he's a very prominent person to this day, told Regal, we need whatever it was, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was, probably 6. We wouldn't have given him 10, trust me. We need 6 minutes. Steve, you're the heel. You're the experienced one. You're managing the match. You're calling the shots. You're the director of traffic in this match, Steve. Nobody communicated that to Bill. Bill just went out there.
Mm.
And when the shit hit the fan, that agent looked down at a piece of paper and never looked up, never took responsibility, never jumped in to say, wait a minute. I think part of the problem was we didn't do a good job communicating.
Right.
I'll take responsibility for that as the agent. Here's how we fix it next time. That didn't happen. All the blame went to Regal. He'd been clean for 7 months. It wasn't a drug issue. It wasn't an attitude issue. It wasn't any of the above other than Steve was going out there to try to get not a 5-minute and 30-second match and not a 6-minute and 30-second match, but a 6-minute match out of Bill Goldberg, who had very little experience, and the agent didn't really participate in the process nor accept responsibility for his role in the collapse of that match. But of course, Steve Regal takes the hit, right? Because that's how it goes. Very unfair.
It's interesting to me that Regal didn't name him in the book. Regal didn't say his name on the podcast. Nobody has really revealed this, and I don't know why. Because in my mind's eye, nobody's infallible. I mean, like, I poke you with a stick every week here, and you're able to say, "Oh, wish I had that to do over again." Oh,
yeah, but I'm so used to it. A lot of these guys aren't used to it.
Well, it just feels like to me, like, hey, man, we all learn, we all get better. But, you know, Mr. Regal has always wanted to keep that close to the vest and not throw anybody under the bus. He's a classy individual. So we're not going to do that either. But because it doesn't feel like, hey, this one bad moment defines his legacy or his, I mean, even if or when that story comes out, it's not going to change the way people feel about that performer. Like, his legacy was cemented so long ago. It just, I don't know. It seems a little silly to not just talk about it, own it, and move on. But
yeah, but again, this is where, and I'm not very good at what I'm about to suggest people sometimes should do. In fact, I really suck at it. I work on it every single day, every day, throughout the day. That's how bad I suck at it. It's so easy to make assumptions and judgments when you don't know everything about a person. Like you and I will be like, it's no big deal. It's one bad night. So what? Move on. I've done all these other great things.
Yes,
you know, if I was Steve Regal. But when you're Steve Regal, and one of the things that you're most proud of is your work ethic and your professionalism.
yes.
And then that comes into question, and you're accused of being unprofessional, taking liberties. I think for Steve Regal, one of the things that probably would hurt him the most is anything that would suggest that he's unprofessional. It wouldn't hurt his feelings if he said, "But your style of wrestling sucks. I don't like it." That wouldn't offend him. He'd probably just nod his head and move on. But when you question his professionalism or his integrity, it may be unusual for a lot of people to feel like they would be impacted by that. But I understand how Steve would feel that way because I know how important that is to him. So it's just different. We're all different. And it shouldn't matter. And I think everybody that really knows Steve Regal personally would understand how this all went down. And I understand, look, I get it. You know, Bill was probably frustrated, I'm sure, at the time. And, you know, Steve Regal does not lie. That I'm 100% confident in. In the moment, Bill probably did feel responsibility. He didn't have the experience. He was put in a position to fail by all of us, me included, because we didn't make sure he was ready for those next. He wasn't ready for a 6-minute match, even if the agent would have communicated it properly, which he didn't, or laid out the match properly. Bill wasn't quite ready for that yet. But the fact that he wasn't even given the opportunity because the agent and the talent and the guy in charge didn't take time to make sure that the match was going to be a good match and make sure that this new talent was given every opportunity to succeed. Instead, it was lazy. That's what it was. It was laziness. Part of the agent, on my part, to a degree, I have some culpability. And to a degree, Regal's. But I'm sure Regal was walking a little bit on eggshells. He's just back, just coming off a pretty uncomfortable suspension. Embarrassing. He just want to go out there and do his job.
He would write, I've always liked Bill because he was always nice to me. Ever since that match, every time I've seen him, he's gone out of his way to shake my hand and even hug me, always. But I haven't seen him since he wrote about the match in his book and slagged me off for it. I thought he was more of a man than that. If he had a problem with that match, he could have come and fronted me about it at any time. He must have met 100. We must have met 100 times since it happened, and he said nothing to me about it until he printed it in his book. The incident earned me a right bollocking off Eric Bischoff. I've always got on well with Eric, but now I know that he got sick of me by then. He was right too. He knew what I could do, and he saw me wasting my talent and not doing it. Eric was always straight with me. If he didn't like something, he'd tell me, and I was always the same with him. When Monday Nitro started, he was a very busy fellow, but he was never too busy to come and shake my hand if he saw me at a show, even if I was at the other end of the arena. Eric knew I wasn't living up to my potential. I didn't look good enough to be in a position to perform. Eric did the right thing, and I have no gripes with him for doing it. Man, this is I don't know how you could read his words and not just have so much respect and appreciation. I mean, you talk about a guy who's self-aware and honest. I mean, he's just that's a man's man right there, pardon the pun.
There's no better way to say it.
Yeah.
And you know, and I use the term professional right along with it. He is a man's man, and he's a professional's professional. I encourage, before we wrap this up, I really, really encourage young talent, established talent, who really want to up their game and fine tune their skill sets, to spend as much time draining this man's brain as you possibly can, and just listen. It may be different guidance than you would get from a typical wrestling instructor, because very few people in the world today that you have access to as a young talent have the depth and breadth of experience and tools to call on to make your game a better game than Steve Regal. So, if I was in NXT, I'd find out where he lived and get an apartment next to him. I'd follow him home at night. I'd make him dinner just for a further opportunity to pick his brain.